Hello and welcome back to Backyard Pet Talk. I am Shannon Riley, your host. And today we have Karen London again. She's just becoming the author extraordinaire, which I'm very excited for her. So she has her new book. This one is My Dog's Mystery Adventures and Other Stories from a Canine Behaviorist and Dog Trainer. I'm really excited to hear Karen talk about this book. When I knew it was available, I just couldn't wait to see it. Karen's a great writer. And if you've listened to any of other podcasts, you can always go back to her other books and they're just fun. She has little stories, just great books and a great author. And now she's just hammering out more books. I think you're doing more books just so we can have our podcast together so that we can talk about it. So
Obviously.
but anyway, Karen, there's going to be some people who don't necessarily, maybe they haven't heard the other podcasts and maybe they're new. So tell us a little bit about yourself, just so if any new listeners don't know and if they haven't heard the other podcasts.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's super fun to be on the podcast with you again. And for anyone who's listened before, they'll know that you and I have a ton in common. We seem to parent the same and train the same and think the same and geek out on science the same. So that's always fun. So I'm super happy to be here. And besides having a lot of things in common with Shannon, I'm a dog trainer and a canine behaviorist. I'm adjunct faculty in the Department of Biological Sciences at Northern Arizona University, where I haven't actually taught since the pandemic, blah, blah, things change. And I spend a lot of time with clients, specializing in aggression and play issues. And I do a lot of writing. This is my 8th book that we'll be talking about today. I wrote for The Bark for many years. I write for Kinship Pets, who used to be The Wildest, and I wrote for them. And I write the animal column in the Arizona Daily Sun, which is called The London Zoo, which I must say for legal reasons has nothing to do with the actual London Zoo and just relates to the fact that my last name is London and I love animals.
That's awesome. And there's such fun books that you write too. So, and we'll make sure all the links are in so everybody can follow. And when they become your avid follower too, they'll know where to find your book. So this is a different book though. This one is, mystery adventures. And this one's a little different than some of your other essays and books. So tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write this particular book.
You're right. It is different than my other dog training and behavior books. I would just say it's sort of a bit less hardcore. And a couple of years ago, published a book called Cows, Ants, Termites, and Me, which I did talk to you about a year or two ago. And that was I was putting together a collection of columns from the first, 7 years that I'd been writing the London Zoo for the local paper. And when I was putting them together, I'm like, oh, it's fun. There's so many different animals. I'm talking about, different snakes and different insects and different birds and worms. And then I kept realizing oh, another dog column, another dog column, another dog column. And it ended up that there were 49 dog columns at that time. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to pull these out and do a book that's specifically dogs. And then I don't know if it's just my sort of OCD tendencies, but I did add a 50th column because 49, even though it's a perfect square, it just 49 didn't seem right. So this is 50 columns. So it's really just when I was putting together a book of columns, I realized, wow, I really do, surprise, surprise, write about dogs a lot. And I wanted that to be in its own book just because, well, most dog people really do love a lot of animals. We all are just dogs, 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 dogs. And that's what I wanted the book to be.
It's true. I mean, as people who are interested in behavior and do what we do and history and zoos and different things, I'm fascinated by all animal behavior. I go to a zoo or I go watch an animal show or something. And I was just teaching. I actually did a class at one of the local universities yesterday. I got to teach a lecture. It was very fun. But I showed dancing with the dogs, but I also showed, so we were talking about, how killer whales are trained and dolphins are trained. And to me, fascinating because learning is just learning. But also some people really just love dogs. I meet people who they obsess over dogs more than any other animal. And so I think this is a great way of being able to share some stories that are, more dog related for those dog people. And then there's also those cat people. So some people are I am not interested in anything but cats. So you'll have to work on, that for those cat people too. But yeah, I think that this is super great. So last time we also talked about some of your favorite stories when we talked a couple of years ago. Do you have any favorite stories in this book?
Oh, let me think. Well, it's hard to choose, but I think I have two favorite stories. One One of them is about, I call it like the ferret article, but basically what it's about, it was a study about long distance running, and running and dogs are sort of my two big passions in life. And they studied, and this was in Arizona, people studied two species that have long distance running in their natural evolutionary history and one that doesn't. The two that have long distance running in their sort of natural, history is dogs, the domestic dog and people, and then ferrets. They studied ferrets who don't have long distance running. And what they did is they trained members of all three of these species. The people is pretty easy to both walk on a treadmill and to run on a treadmill. And they studied a bunch of physiological things about them before and after, including looking in their body for like chemicals that are basically like happy brain chemicals. So, and they found that there's endocannabinoids that appear in the blood of dogs and humans after they do long distance running, but not before, and not after walking. So it really has to be running. And ferrets didn't show that. And it just shows that running is important for us. As hunters, humans historically were hunters, and same with dogs. They needed to do a lot of endurance running in order to eat and survive. But that isn't true of ferrets. Just like it's not true of cheetahs. They run fast, but they don't run long. And so the idea is that maybe that our happy brain chemicals encouraged us to do this life-saving activity. And it also, and I just think this is so funny. I wrote this is an adapted version. I wrote a guest blog for Trisha McConnell's blog one time. And she commented when she read it that she thought she was part ferret because she's super fit and active and loves to hike and walk. But she's like, no, not running. And Trisha McConnell is another, I'm assuming most people know, a well-known trainer and behaviorist. She's a dear friend of mine and my mentor. And in fact, this book is dedicated to her,
that's awesome. And we will be having her on our podcast with her new book, but we digress there. But yes,
yeah,
that's
no,
awesome.
no, it's always relevant. That's great. I just think it's so funny that she describes herself as a
Well,
ferret.
when you were saying that, because I love to run, I'm not necessarily always fast anymore because I'm getting older, but I love running. And the way I feel after I run is different. But I also hike. And part of the reason I have my pink hair is because I walked 60 miles this weekend, partly in the rain, which was not always fun. But I don't get the same, like that runner's high. I get a different feeling when I run, and my knees are getting a little more arthritis. And I had a doctor say, well, why do you run? And I'm like, I run as much for my body as I do my brain. If I am having a hard day, a run will relieve me more. So that's fascinating. And, it's fascinating that dogs, since so many people get dogs to run with them, they're getting a chance to do that together. But that is funny. I know a lot of people who are ferrets or probably think they're ferrets
Right,
as well.
right. And there's nothing wrong with being part ferret. I love that story just because it relates to running and dogs and it's interesting science and it has to do with our brains and our emotions and sort of all the things I like. And my other favorite story is the one that gave the title to the book, My Dog's Mystery Adventure. And that is, I had a dog whose name was Bugsy back in the late 90s and early 2000s. And I went to visit my Aunt Liz in Vermont. I was living in New Hampshire with my husband who was going to school in New Hampshire. And I took my dog to my aunt's house. And my aunt is special to me for many reasons. She's absolutely wonderful. I mean, we kept her even after she divorced my dad's brother. We're like, oh, but she's still, aunt. So we kept her. She had Great Danes. She and my uncle had Great Danes, and that was like my childhood breed. Like I just loved her Great Danes and being with them. But she had this dog named Nellie, who I think was a Blab, a Beagle Lab cross, was sort of a small black, always wanted to be in the trash kind of dog. I had a dog, Bugsy, who I used to say was half black lab and half handsome stranger. And I remember it was the 4th of July because that's my birthday, so I wouldn't forget it. And we went out early in the day, and when we came back, Bugsy was sitting on the porch outside, and it's not fenced there. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. Well, at least he didn't go anywhere. Well, it turned out he had gone everywhere. And when she had a party that night for the 4th of July or that afternoon, all these neighbors were telling me all about what they saw Bugsy doing. He was all over Brattleboro, Vermont. My dog, Bugsy, was not a super smart dog. He just was kind of simple. And in fact, when people used to say like, oh, don't you wonder what your dog's thinking? My husband, Rich, and I used to joke. Rich would say, well, we know what Bugsy's thinking. He's thinking, duh. Like he just wasn't super sharp. My aunt's dog, Nellie, had opened the door and let him out. And she just opened the door and sat on the porch. She opened the door for him and he was like, whoosh. So it's just about all the things I learned about what he did that day, which is kind of a special magic. A lot of people's dogs have gotten out, but you never know what happened. But I happened to learn. And I'm not making light of it. Like, obviously, it could have been really terrible really badly hurt or worse. And I after that, I learned like I really have to be more cautious with doors with him, but I hadn't had him that long and I didn't know. So I don't want people to
Right.
think I'm taking a dog.
No, exactly. But it's also, now people have all the air tags on their dogs on this GPS system. And sometimes dogs will get out and they watch, where they ran and where they came back. And then if they obviously can find them usually that way, or sometimes they're back on the porch and they don't know that they ran around the neighborhood or until they think it's fun. And it could have been a great day for Bugsy. Bugsy may have been like, this was the party day. I got to go explore all the neighbors and have fun.
Oh yeah, I'm positive he had a glorious time. When I think back on it, I don't have him anymore. Obviously, he died many years ago. It just thrills me to know that he had this wonderful day, even though I wasn't even there to witness it. It just gives me such joy. And it's sort of, I think the idea of dogs' lives and their sort of their internal workings or what they do when we're not around them being a bit of a mystery to us is sort of why I wanted to name the book that and
Mhm.
sort of a meta level. I mean, obviously we mostly know what they're doing, but they have a whole different world than ours. It's obviously tightly shared, but I sort of love
Right.
knowing that he had a whole world I didn't know about in a way. And personified by that day.
In a strange way, it makes me kind of wish because our dogs do have such controlled lives. They're in our yards. We control when they eat. We control when they sleep. We have a lot of control over what they do. And part of me in that more rebellious side kind of wishes dogs did have more Bugsy days that were safe. They could do that. I think that that's great that he had that. And it's a great way of sharing for people to think about those things. I think all of your books make people think outside the box a little bit or think in a different perspective. So, because your stories are relatable, like the running or, something, it makes you start to think about yourself a little bit or how dogs or animals relate into our life. So you have those, really great stories. And so all of these were every dog and every story in there. Are those all dogs you've worked with yourself or were they dogs you knew about or how did you
I
come up
mean,
with
there are a few dogs. There's a few stories about dogs I worked with, like this one dog who I was fostering. I was holding her leash, and she was a very difficult house training case. She was like in between 18 and 20 weeks old, and she just, she would like pee and poop in her crate, but not on a leash. And I was out with her, and it was super cold, like below zero in February in Madison, Wisconsin, or just outside of Madison, Wisconsin. I lived on a farm, and right as she squatted to pee, which was a huge victory because she was just really learning to do that, I like slipped on the ice and like pulled her. I don't use punishment, but that was punishment, but I didn't do it on purpose. So
right?
things like that. But I feel like the book is just so, to me, it's sort of everything I am. It's like a whole bunch of different things. Like I'm a behavior and I'm a trainer. I kind of have my toe in academics. And this book, there's some science, there's some behavior, there's some training, reading dogs' body language. There's some stuff about play. There's things about shelter dogs, some like how to deal with coyotes. I wrote, I think the first column, which was a guest column, and I wrote for this column for the previous person that did the column in the local paper about just what people name their dogs. And I talked about like Paris Hilton and Jake Gyllenhaal and various presidents and what they name. So it's sort of most of the dogs I talk about are ones I worked with, but there's a lot of things that aren't really
Just kind of side that you just were in the media or just came up because
yeah.
sometimes that happens when you're in our field. Sometimes they'll ask you a question that you've never I've had this happen where somebody will ask me a question about their dog or their pet and I'm like, well, I haven't ever personally dealt with this like strange behavior. I can't think of one off the top of my head, but then it makes me start thinking more like, well, what would because it's always what's the motivation for the behavior, what's the trigger if it's a reactivity kind of situation and why do they do that. And I always think it's pretty fascinating when you can start to help people have a little more understanding because so many people just see dogs as just like their pet, their companion. And I also work with a lot of fearful and aggressive dogs and just had this week somebody and they were trying to say that their dog was barking, which was a very fearful bark and stuff because they were trying to communicate with the neighbors' dogs, like they did on 101 Dalmatians, where they bark down the row. And I'm like, well, there's a part of that, but also there was a coyote outside or there was a person walking with a dog with a leash outside. So yes, they may have been communicating, but they also were fearful. And by the way, when there's a sound, their ears go back, their tail tucks, like their body doesn't say, oh, yay, I'm talking on the phone with my other doggy friends. They're saying, oh my God, somebody's going to kill me. And I find that when I can explain it to people in soft ways, like not just I could geek out, like we can geek out, but not using all those terms, but just helping them understand. And that's where I think your stories help because they're more relatable and it's not like reading a textbook about behavior, but they're learning about behavior and helping their dogs or other animals as the other books.
Yeah, I'm glad you see it that way. Thank you. I do think this book has a lot of that because I've got one about how play should be relaxed and not tense and how the pauses in play are something to look for. And I have things about, yawning in dogs, meaning that they can be contagious and it can be a sign of anxiety and just all the things you can see in their mouth, tongue flicks and offensive puckers and fear grimaces and the side of the body and how the brain because different emotions are generally processed in different sides of the brain, what side of your dog's body they're using, whether they're wagging their tail in one direction more than the other, or if they use one palm, or what they tell about emotionally, or talk about, I think I have one whole column about circle wags and or helicopter wags, whatever people call them. And so
Right.
there are quite a lot about body language. And since am trained, I'm trained as an ethologist studying natural behavior, I'm always interested to watch dogs and see what they're doing. And I feel like it's a little primer for lots of very basic concepts, but I go into them in some degree of depth, how dogs tend to respond to visual cues more than vocal cues. And remember, I wrote this for a newspaper audience, so it's meant to be really accessible. But I think even if people know quite a bit about dog training and behavior, there's still things in there, although, not everything in there would be a revelation to someone that is serious about dogs already, of course.
Just like what you were sharing about running part and knowing that there's different species of animals. And there were some stories, your ant and cows, like that one. I think you had a worm story in there that I'm trying to remember now because it's been about a year since I've read that book. They were just fascinating to think about things in different ways. And I think in a lot of ways, all of your books help people relate to animals in general better. I don't know if it's just me getting older and doing so many things, but it used to be, I know, oh, well, you smashed a worm or something. Well, now I'm like, I literally found a caterpillar on a hike. I didn't step on it, but I saw it and I'm like, oh, there's a lot of bikes here. So I scooped up the caterpillar to put on the side of the road. And my friend's like, I don't know, it's just different. The more you're immersed in animals, no matter what their species, you pay more attention. And I have bees in my backyard in the spring and they're kind of a nuisance sometimes. If I see one that's dying, because it's already stung something, like I feel sad for that bee. And I'm like, when did this all start changing that I started being more empathetic? I always cared about animals, but it was more the dogs, the cats, the zoo animals. And now it's just my friends think I'm crazy, but I have a spider that lives in my bathroom. And I tell him, as long as you don't bother me, you can keep your web up there. And my friend's like, I could never have a spider. I'm like, he doesn't leave his web and he catches flies. I just talk to him when I get ready for bed, but it's just a different, and I think that's where your books help, all of them, because they come from these different perspectives. And yes, you say, oh, they're from a newspaper, but I think that helps because sometimes I think we feel like we're technical people, like we have all this education, we should talk more technical, but we lose some of the audience when you do that.
Yeah, and I don't tend to talk super technically. I feel like a lot of technical terms are useful for communicating with someone who that exact same perspective and education that you have. Just for clarity, it's just quick, but really it's not useful. I think a lot of people love to use a lot of technical words to show they know them, which is fine. It's exciting to learn new things, but I try to avoid it, or if I use it, I explain it. And I do think that the more people understand animals, the more they like them. And I'm very impressed by the way that you have been so generous with bees because I know you get, especially as a child, were stung by bees a lot.
Yes.
And it's the whole thing. But yeah, my sister used to talk about like being stung by a bee or something similar. She'd call it a UUEE, an unplanned, undesirable entomological event. It's such a funny way to say it. But when you were talking about your bee sting issue, one times we talked, I was thinking of that. But yeah, I do think understanding animals does make us care more. And like it's exciting to like watch a bird moving their like wings up. For anyone listening, I'm acting it out so Shannon can see it. But like that, and you realize like, well, that's how young will often solicit food. And when you just see them, it's like, what are they doing? It's nice to know that's what they're doing. Or if you see a dog who's like putting their tongue up and the tip of it up to their nose, you're like, oh, they're a little bit anxious. Or when they cock their head, they're likely interested in some stimulus. Like the more you know, the more interesting it is. To me, it's just like a language. Like I'm learning Portuguese right now, so I'm watching Master Chef Brazil. The more like every word I get is like a new friend and it helps me understand more. And I feel like it's learning about animal behavior is a lot like learning a language. You're just always, there's always more to learn. learn. And it's always, every piece is an exciting little addition to your journey.
100%. Even within humans, like when we have miscommunication, that's when problems happen, right? Like just in the world, like or relationships. I think we see that sometimes with animals. A dog's trying to express, like this dog that was scared that was barking. And, and I recommended to the client, I don't think leaving your front door open all the time is actually making your dog more relaxed. It's actually stressing them out because every time someone goes, they're hyper vigilant. And then when she closed the door, the dog's laid on their side and we're like sound asleep. And I'm like, okay, in this moment, we're going to stop and look at the difference of the body language, not what you're perceiving them to be thinking and not you're humanizing them, but like watch how they're responding. It's kind of fun when you can do that. Or I had a new client this week that was a min pin that was, nervous about visitors. So she was showing me around to its room and this dog play bowed at me when I picked up one of his toys. And I was like, oh, so of course me going, oh, you want to play? And so we start playing. And she looked at me and she said, she's never played with anyone else before, but probably nobody saw that invitation. They might have thought it was a stretch or just didn't even notice at all. But I was able to respond immediately when she invited me. And it was like, oh, you understand my language. And then we played with a toy, which was pretty awesome for this dog who I came there partly because she's nervous of strangers. And it was my first time at her house. So, when we can read that and we can make those adjustments, almost like if you have a friend who I have a friend who's afraid of birds. So if we are walking along our beach and there's a bunch of seagulls, her whole body gets tight. So I'm like, either I talk to her, like I address it. I know what she's doing. I'm like, okay, let's get the birds out of here. I'm like, or do you want to walk that way? And I just respond to help her be able to regulate her nervous system quickly. But that's how I think if we can watch our dogs and know right away, this is kind of a lot of people might recognize this, but most of us know when our dog's about to go to the bath. Oh, and they're not squatting, they're not doing, whatever their thing is, but they have certain body language. And so you're like, oh, you got to get outside, scoot outside if you're in the house. And so, but we recognize that because it happens so frequently and you get reinforced because they do it. And then you're like, oh, I was right. I think paying attention to all those little things, like you said, the licking their nose or cocking their head or lifting their paw, those subtle things that people don't notice. They notice a tail tuck or they notice hackles up or they notice maybe ears pinned back, but they don't know some of those subtle things. And those subtle things are so important.
Yeah, I agree. And I think reading a dog and understanding them, like you're talking about how maybe this dog might have invited other people to play, but they didn't take them up on the invitation. And I think I can't say that, it's not like the dog has told me this, but I have gone to people's houses with the dog and, it's like, and you respond to them in certain ways. You can almost feel the dog be like, oh, like that, to be understood. Like if they look tense and I back away,
Right.
they're like, oh, okay, like it made sense. And instead of, and I'm sure this happens all the time in any field, people will say, oh my God, no, it came out of nowhere. There were no signs, and there often are signs. And I'm sure physicians feel this, or dentists, or, electricians. It's like, oh, there were no signs at all. I mean, yeah, sure, there was that like, kind of like cackling sound in the wall, but there were no signs at all of, like and I feel like that happens a lot with dogs. And I mean, I love sharing information, whether it's with clients or if with talks or webinars, or if it's, in my writings, just because people do love dogs and people do have, almost everyone has a certain understanding of dog, but we're all always learning more. And to be a part of helping people relate better to dogs, other animals too, but dogs are one of my faves, of course.
Exactly. Well, I was actually thinking about this because thinking about my history and like how I've gotten here, and a lot of people have been in like zoos, and then they eventually like focus. And I've always loved dogs, but I focused on that now with my career, partly because that's the species that needs the most help with humans. They're just all such a part of our life. So I just love it. So you've had your books, you've had some that are more technical, but you've also had some of the more fun ones. Can you briefly just kind of share to the audience, in case this is someone's first time hearing, they're like, oh, who's this Karen London? And what are some more of these books that she has, so they can go back? We have some podcasts on some of them, but they can also go, to Amazon or their bookstores and check you out. So can you briefly tell us about some of your other books that you wrote?
Oh, sure. I'd love to. Well, I have 8 books. 5 of them I co-wrote with Patricia McConnell, 3 when I worked for her, and 2 after I moved away because of my husband's job. We have one called Way to Go, about house training a dog of any age. And then there's Feisty Fido, dealing about leash reactivity and leash aggression. Feeling Outnumbered, which is managing a multi-dog household. One called Love Has No Age Limit, which is about adopting dogs who are not puppies.
Senior dogs.
Yeah, see, well, no, not necessarily
Or
senior
just
dog, right?
older. Yeah.
Yeah, no, anyone really that's like adolescent or beyond, because there's so much
Mhm.
stuff about puppies. So yeah, that one was super funny because we were with the title, we were trying to think of a name for it. I had one phone call with Trisha and we were just finishing things up, and she's like, I really want to come up with a title. I'm like, yeah, no, it's important, but it's like, I just really have this phrase I want to use somewhere in the book. Love has no age limit. And after like 20 minutes, we were like, we can solve this problem. We can use that phrase for the title. It was just super stupid of us. It took us a while to get there. Oh, and then Play Together, Stay Together, about dog human play. So those are the five I co-wrote with Trisha McConnell. We already discussed, of course, My Dog's Mystery Adventure, my most recent one, which was an offshoot of the original plan of my collection of 145 columns from the paper, which were all other animals. Although I think there are a couple ways that dogs get mentioned in that book, but it's not about dogs. And
Mhm.
then the one that sort of probably, if anyone were to know me just from a book, the one that they're most likely to know, I think, is Treat Everyone Like a Dog, which is
Mhm.
basically about like harnessing the skill set of dog trainers to influence the behavior of people, because that's what dog trainers do. They influence dogs' behavior. Like, I want you to do this, I don't want you to do that. And really, human interaction is just full of that. I want you to clean your room, or I want you to take this car, or I want you to call me more often, or whatever you want people to do, or you want your roommate not to be grumpy on Monday morning. All these things are things that dog training skills apply directly to. So that is basically a whole book of stories. And that one to me is, I mean, I'm always most excited in a way about my most recent book. That's just, because it's new and different. But Treat Everyone Like a Dog is, I kind of think of it like I've described it as, it's a love letter to dog trainers and an instruction manual for everyone else. And it really is, it's not just, I say this all the time, but that book is not just about what I do, it's about who I am. So
Right. Yeah. I remember when that one came out, I was so excited about that one too, because my daughter is autistic, and I'm a parent. And so all those things that I would try to incorporate what I would learn as I've been learning dog training since the 90s. When I was switching over, because, it's a teenager punishment, I didn't even like it as a teenager. So it's like, as soon as I became an adult and had some autonomy of my own way of training and my education, and I've always just loved that. And then when I've managed vet hospitals, I was a manager for a while, and I was always trying to incorporate positive reinforcement or things. I was just talking earlier today, an ABA therapist, about some things for my daughter. And she's like, well, you're going to understand, a lot of these things. And as they're going through, I was like, they're making basically a training plan for my daughter, like I make for dogs. But I love it because it really does help. It's such a better relational, way. It makes you feel better as the person who's training or wanting to change your behavior, but then it helps that bond. And I have had clients say, Shannon, you're not a dog trainer, you're a human trainer. And I said, well, that's probably really true, except on my website, if you wrote human trainer, no one's going to call you for help with their dog.
right. Yeah, you have to be careful about that. Like, I definitely did a lot of, and I know we've talked about this before, I definitely did a lot of things with my kids that are just like I do with dogs. And some of it's like obvious, like positive reinforcement and classical conditioning. But not everyone would think it's cool that I taught my kids to heel, but I did it for safety. And I called it stick close just to avoid weird looks at the park. And I used it in parking lots, not at the park. But I didn't want to be that mom. I stand by our skills as dog trainers and how they apply to parenting. And I mean, you have to distinguish, to
Totally. It's not, you're
with
not going
any
to say
species.
sit down. Exactly. But you
Right.
have those. That's funny. You
Right.
reminded me, my kids, because I had three, all under 5, and my daughter was barely walking because of her cerebral palsy. And so when I get them out of the stroller or get them out of the car, I would have to put the baby in the cart. And so I would tell them, everybody touch the car. And now I think, I looked ridiculous because it probably looked like I had them all like they were being arrested because they put their hands on the car. I'm like, everybody touches the car and then you touch the cart, and you had to be holding the cart through the parking lot. And I had all of those target behaviors that
Right. Yeah.
and
I
it was
mean,
just natural. Yeah.
I did
So
the same thing, like, well, when we were in parking lots, and I'm not a fearful person about many things, but parking lots with young children. I have two kids only, and they're 20 months apart. So, two toddlers at a time, kind of. And as soon as the youngest one started to walk, it got even more hectic. As with three, it's even a whole other thing, of course. But I always was like, in the parking lot, you're either holding my hand, touching the cart, or touching the car. There are no other options. And then when they
right.
got a little bit older, I'd be like, okay, if you stay close to me, right? If you stick close, then you don't have to hold my hand. Like, you're such a big boy now, that whole thing. But yeah, I just wanted to keep them safe. And the way I think of it is that we know a lot of things as dog trainers, keeping dogs safe around roads and streets. That's why we use leashes. That's why we use heel. That's why we want a good recall, all these things. I have solved these problems previously with dogs. So it's natural to apply some of them to kids. And I always laugh because I don't, well, when I wrote that book, I did check with my kids anytime I mentioned them, I read all those parts to them. It was during the pandemic and they were in high school, so they had time on their hands. And I read it to them to make sure. And there were a couple things they asked me to take out and I did, but everything in there was approved. But I mean, I think my kids, and they're now 20 and a half and 22, and I think they feel pretty happy about, like, I didn't yell at them and taught them in steps. And if they didn't do something I wanted them to do, I wasn't immediately thinking it was their fault. I was like, okay, what's wrong with this situation? How do we fix it? Like, how do I make this work for us? And I think I mean, I'm sure they have plenty of stories with eye rolls, or hopefully not a lot of inks to share with their friends about us, my husband and me as parents. But generally, I try not to speak for them, but generally I feel like the parts of it where I was like being kind and nice because I'm a positive dog trainer, I apply it to them. I don't think they have any complaints about that.
Right. I think as I've grown just older and all of these things, plus different things I've gone through in my own personal life, having just empathy and compassion for other people. And that's where that book really, because that's what a lot of people, you have empathy and compassion for your dogs, but they don't always have it for other people. And that book, particular to, people like you to your dog, really, I think can speak to people who maybe are trying to figure out a better way of being in relationship with other humans. So
I think that's true. I think a lot of people read that book, other positive dog trainers, and they had this impression, and I take this in the nice way. I know they meant it like, oh my God, I could have written this book. I mean, it's like it resonated with people in a way. There was one person who's like, I could have written this book. It's like, yeah, but you didn't. I did. But
exactly.
mostly it's like I get what that people are saying. Like they have these ideas are not necessarily revolutionary. There's plenty of people that think this, but I think there's other people who it really is like maybe they don't think about this particular set of skills, but the idea of being kind and gentle with other humans, just like they naturally are with dogs, was like eye-opening in a way. Because I think a lot of people, not counting the occasional psychopath, we want to be
Right.
nice people and we want to be kind and we want to be a positive element of their lives. And we don't want to have a lot of conflict. Sort of all of our journey through life is how to get there. And I think dog trainers have a route in that other people could easily learn and take up. And I think one of the reasons I think that book has been as popular as it is because it makes sense to people and it's got practical applications. And I mean, of course, I don't hear from the people that are like, well, this seems like bunk. I hear from the people that like it, that where it was helpful to them in some way or amusing, just somehow fit into their life and their view of life.
I remember when you were first promoting, when it was coming out, I was, really excited about it. It's actually something that when I mentor dog trainers or I hire dog trainers for my business, if they're not nice to people, they don't get to work for me. And for me, it's a culture. It's not just to the dogs. It's being kind and compassionate to the humans and the animals. I think that that's important. And for some people, if they're not used to this, like you and I live it, so it's a little easier to transition to people. But if you've never trained dogs or you've never been in this, sometimes it's a muscle you have to sometimes build if you've been raised in a certain way or you've always had a certain mindset. So people can just practice. And the more they're exposed to it, the more that it becomes more natural for them.
I agree. And I do think and I love this about our field, but I think there are a lot of people in the field of dog training and behavior who have had various social challenges, and it can be all kinds of things. I mean, I think there are a lot of people in our field that have struggled with infertility. I think there are a lot of people that are survivors of various kinds of abuse, whether it's from their family that they grew up with or people they're in relationships with. And I think dogs are very healing. So I think our field draws a lot of people. And
For
I
sure.
think because of that, we almost get the extremes, people who are very like loving and kind because what happened to them and they don't want to happen to anyone else. And people who had a lot of, I'm going to say violence, but I mean like emotional violence or, challenges. And that's all they know. And they're comfortable with dogs and they don't do that to dogs, but they just are not necessarily, I'm making sweeping generalizations. There's every sort of person in our field. But I
Totally.
think there are people who they didn't know a better way because unfortunately, they didn't have the luxury of growing up with I mean, everybody's family is a little crazy, but you know what I mean? Like a basically kind and loving family that's like crazy and cute, quirky ways, not serious, damaging ways. So I think that there's a lot of emotion in our field, like incredible, loving, rescuing, like people who, if they were to see like a dog in distress on the side of the road, they literally would not be able to sleep for days, which is very loving and endearing, but a very hard way to live. And then
Yeah.
people who struggle to be kind to people because people haven't been kind to them. So I think it's very interesting how dogs who just, they all deserve our loving kindness, just like people do, but our field has drawn in people of all kinds of emotional needs and exploration. I'm really off on a tangent, but I just think it's
Totally.
interesting. And I think that might be one of the reasons that our field is filled with people who are very, very kind to dogs. The kindness to people is a little bit behind, I think. But
Yeah, and they
getting,
haven't had it modeled. If they didn't
yeah,
have it modeled, and then it's why it's a big deal for me when I'm mentoring a trainer. They'll complain about a client or something. And I'm like, well, okay, yes, you have your frustrations with that client, but let's think about what are their issues. Do they have some other kind of thing going on in their life that's making it difficult? And then when you can kind of come from that place, you make more progress, I think, in so many ways. But it's
yeah,
hard for
I
people
always,
to do.
yeah, I always tend to do that. I always try. I really do see. In fact, sometimes it's almost made me not on purpose and in a nice way, like kind of slightly argumentative with other people. Other people be like, "Oh, why do they do this?" And well, like maybe. And the way I would describe this, I had this model to me. My mom was like, I actually mentioned this in her. My mom died in 2014. It's been a long time, but I mentioned in her eulogy, she said that she was. There's a story of her being in line behind someone who was using some kind of food program to buy food. They were buying watermelon, which was like kind of expensive, and someone's like, "Can you believe they're using?" I don't know if it was like food stamps or SNAP or WIC, whatever, to buy watermelon. And first of all, whatever they use with that is their business. That's,
Right.
my mom said, and my mom was not a doormat. She was no shrinking violet. She was very, very outspoken, which for a woman born in the 1930s, I just really admired in anyone, any woman, but just from a different generation, even more so. And she turned to the person and said, and probably not in the nicest, gentlest way, well, I mean, maybe they're trying to serve dessert for people and there's no cheaper dessert for a big crowd of people than like a watermelon. And my mom entertained a lot. So not only to me is it endearing because she was saying like, well, maybe it's this thing. And also, sort of shut your mouth, but in a nicer way than that. And also
Yes.
her mind immediately went to entertaining, which is so, but I just think like always looking at, well, maybe it's this cause. I feel like I either inherited or was modeled by her. And I always said, well, maybe they're really struggling with this. And I definitely have seen lately, I do charge a certain amount to see people and I know it can be hard, but I feel like a lot of people are in a lot of financial distress. And I do feel like I'm seeing that in the interactions with family members that I'm seeing. And, I just like, I understand there's a lot of reasons to be stressy in life. And now I think more people are feeling it maybe than average, or at least what I'm seeing. And I try to be really sympathetic to that. But it does mean it takes more emotion in every appointment sometimes. And I have to kind of ration that out. Not a well of, you got to replenish.
100%. And you have to totally refill. And I tell people that I can only see so many private dog clients, especially with aggression or fear, because I'm managing the dog, making sure everybody's safe, making sure everybody's emotions are safe, like, and making sure I'm safe. Like, it's pretty taxing on your brain sometimes when you're dealing with a human that has stuff and then a dog that has stuff. And then if that dog might actually redirect and hurt you or somebody in the room, there's a lot of things that you're managing a lot. Being
Definitely.
kind and
Yeah.
compassionate and then making sure you refill your own cup.
Yeah, I mean, I find it can be exhausting, and I don't mind that. I love my job. I love working
Right.
with people. I have no issues working with people in distress. I jump right into those big emotions, and I'm fine with that. But I couldn't do it on an empty well, so I just have to pay attention to that. And I don't know if you found this, but I do find that I feel like lately I'm just seeing a lot of distress in my community.
Yes. And then recognizing what they can handle. Like, that's where sometimes they're feeling stressed. I'm like, okay, so maybe we can't do 5 exercises this week, as a very simple example. Maybe we should just do three. Okay,
Yeah.
let's just do three. And that's okay. And if you do those three things well, then that's great. And then maybe next time we'll work on those other two. And I am finding that where people who were go, go, go when, like, I want to do all, I want to train. And then they're like, whoa, well, I had to work extra or this stress happened. And I'm like, okay, then let's just recalibrate. We're just going to readjust what we expect you or what your plan is or what our goals are. And we'll get there. It just might be a little different route. I agree. I've been seeing that a lot too. And I
Yeah,
think that's also why I get people who come back, because there are other trainers who are like, you didn't do your homework, and there's no compassion. So then all of a sudden they're like, well, I went to this other person. I've been hearing this a lot and they weren't very nice to me. And I'm like, okay. And we move on from there. But I do hear that.
Yeah, that happens sometimes here too, unfortunately. I often just try to tell people, look, I just feel like as long as we're moving in the right direction, the speed of getting there is not the biggest issue. We just want to be moving in the right direction. Yeah, and ironically, I think sometimes doing less is actually better for the dogs. I sometimes think that I will make a plan between appointments that's less when the people are in distress. I've actually noticed, I wonder if you have, sometimes that just actually seems to be better overall. Like maybe I've been doing too much for the dog, even though it wasn't too much for the people in some cases.
Oh, for sure. I have some people where they want to do more, and I'm like, your dog can't handle more. Let's just build it. And then sometimes, which I always say this in my agility classes, fast is slow and slow is fast. So I'm like, when we take those little baby steps, it may feel like we're going slower because we're doing this instead of these big old leaps, but they're going to there's a meme that's on Facebook I've seen with the rungs of a ladder. And, you can get up the ladder faster when they're all really close than if you have to leap and pull and leap and pull. My agility students will say, oh, that's her phrase, fast is slow and slow is fast, because when they're trying to hurry through something, there's usually a mistake or the stress, and we have to go backwards. So,
right. Yeah. I mean, I remember I helped out, I was an assistant with some agility classes many years ago in New Hampshire. And I just remember a couple of dogs who had really not been trained properly to, hit their contacts. It's like
mhm.
so much easier to do it right the first time.
Exactly.
So,
Well, Karen, it's been so great to have you again. And I can't wait till your next book is written. So we have another excuse to have another podcast and talk about dogs and do some of our geeking out things. But before we wrap up, is there anything else? We've shared so many things. I hopefully our audience got a whole wealth of getting to know you, getting to understand your books, and seeing this book that's more dog related, but also going back to some of those others. Is there anything that you would like to share with the audience before we end our today?
well, I guess there's two things. One is that I really think this book, because it's 500 word essays and it's relatively short, kind of makes a good stocking stuffer. So I like that idea. And then the other thing is, and I know for people who are listening, this won't necessarily resonate, but for anyone watching on YouTube, all the dogs on the cover, front and back, are dogs like in my life in some way. So I'll just hold this up and describe it. But the dog who's upside down at the top, her name is Sailor, and she belongs to my friend Erin, and she's just leaps and jumps like a kangaroo, and she's just so goofy and lovable. And I love it that she is upside down. And then this one here on the side of the front cover, his name is Bodhi, and his owner Stella was truly one of the most dedicated dog owners I've ever worked with. Just really, like, if all people were like that, it would be amazing. She's recently passed away, unfortunately, but Bodhi's still alive. And then this is Lewis up on top by the word dogs. And I love this because this dog is owned by Eileen Anderson, and she's my editor. This is from Eileen and Dogs.
Mhm.
And she's edited all three of my books that I've done recently that I've solo authored. And the dog has his paws like all messed up in my words here, with just like Eileen does as my editor. Then this little puppy at the bottom, Rosie, belonged to my friend Leah, who is an excellent trainer, and she actually trained me. She's a professional runner. So I trained her dog and she trained me, and the dog's like turning the page. And then on the back, this giant dog is Boulder, belongs to my friend Travis, 220-pound dog. Actually, I guess he's lost weight. He's 210 pounds, and he is just the sweetest lug. And then when the book design came up, there was one spot left, and I was talking to my designer. His name is Heather, and I asked her, I'm like, do you have a dog? And she has this dog, Brian, and which is my son's name. And so I was like, well, just put Brian on the cover. So all of these dogs are
That's
perfect for
awesome.
me. And I just love having like kind of, the designer lives in my state, and I love having dogs that, I mean, maybe if a designer were picking dogs to be these weren't the dogs they pick, but it makes it extra special to me.
I think that's amazing because that's really fun to have all of those. And that makes it even more special. So someone sees that, if they've listened to it, they'll identify those dogs. And as always, Karen, it's so nice to have you. Anyone who's listening, check out Karen's books. They're all available on Amazon, probably your bookstores. You just Google it and you can find them very easily. And definitely a great idea for stocking stuffers or gifts. I have given some of your books that to people who may not want to read hardcore behaviory books but love animals. I have given your books as gifts to people. They're such nice, easy reads, fun, and they keep you entertained. Well, thank you so much once again for being here. And definitely anyone who's listening, check out Karen's books because they're really fun. And then we'll hopefully in a year or so have another podcast about the next book.
I hope
Thank you
so.
so much for being here.
Thank you, Shannon, for having me. I really enjoyed it as always.